44 African countries have signed up to a historic trade agreement aimed at paving the way for a liberalized market for goods and services across the continent. The African Continental Free Trade Area, an agreement cast in the mold of the European Union's version, was signed during the 10th ordinary session of African Union Heads of State Summit held in Rwanda capital Kigali. The African Continental Free Trade Area gives birth to the world's largest free trade area since the World Trade Organization, which was formed in 1995. Today our talking point is Africa agrees on a deal for a continental free trade area, the beginning of a united Africa. Hello to you all, fellow viewers, and thanks for joining me in the studio. It's Views on the Continent on Africa Media TV. Today, we are talking about the African continent. Africa has decided to be independent. They have taken a bold step to step out of being dependent. Now they want their own free trade area. And as the head of states and representatives met in Kigali this week, 44 out of 55 African countries have agreed that they want a free trade area. However, some of them, shockingly, including the Republic of Nigeria and South Africa, haven't signed, among others. Now, what do you think about this? Remember, this program is quite an interactive one. You can call us using any of the numbers on the screen to participate during today's program. We are waiting to get your reactions on today's talking point. Or I would like to remind you as well that you could talk about anything that is making news in the African continent that you will want other people to hear from whichever part of the country you are joining us. You can as well leave us a comment on the post on our Facebook page, Views on the Continent of Africa Media TV, or you send us a message. We will read the comments and the messages during the course of the program. Now, I would like us to go to Kigali and witness firsthand what has been happening as our heads of state and leaders decided to go independent. Let's go to Kigali and I'll join you right after that.
A busy market in Nigeria's capital, Lagos. With nearly 190 million people, the West African nation is Africa's biggest country. But for traders here, there's an even bigger market out there across the continent. That's why 6 years ago, the African Union decided to set up the African Continental Free Trade Area. Its 55 member states are home to 15% of the world's population and have a combined GDP of more than $2 trillion. And now African leaders have put pen to paper to create the free trade area.
The promise of free trade and free movement is prosperity for all Africans because we are prioritizing the production of value-added goods and services.
The common market will go into effect after enough countries ratify the agreement. It will eliminate most tariffs between African states, which now average 6%. That's expected to generate $16 billion in additional business every year. Trade between African nations currently stands at about 10% of the continent's total commerce. For thus trade volumes to grow, African countries need to do more to meet their own demand.
If the African Continental Free Trade Area is to work, it's important that we see more manufacturing and agro-processing and processing generally in the continent.
Nigeria initially backed the creation of the free trade area, but it withdrew support after labor unions and companies in the West African nation reportedly opposed the deal. They believe Nigerian businesses are not ready to withstand foreign competition.
We think it's just maybe one step back that they're taking to review. My understanding is that they want to review again some aspect of the FCTA.
For now, the business people across Africa are optimistic that the signing in Kigali will be a game changer, one that will unite the continent and bring greater economic prosperity.
And of course, many people are talking about this treaty and looking at it as one that is going to unite the African continent, and which is going to go a very, very long way to make us very dependent. Is views on the continent on Africa Media TV. If you're just joining us. And today we are asking if the fact that our leaders have agreed to sign or to go ahead in a plan or in a bid to launch a free trade area, does this mean that this is a major step for Africa to become united? Of course, after these other issues such as the flow of trade is going to follow, and the flow of free movement of people will follow. Things such as money, the same money or currency being used by all African states is one of the things that are going to follow this agreement. Now, this has been a dream that so many African leaders who have departed would have loved to see today. We are thinking about Kwame Nkrumah, we're thinking about Muammar Gaddafi. Now, the European Union and its free trade agreement took decades to establish. Africa is now hoping it can achieve the same in a fraction of the time. The Nigeria pulling out questions are being raised over just how achievable this is going to be. We're talking about Nigeria, countries such as South Africa who have pulled out, which have pulled out of this deal. Now, what does this mean for the rest of the African continent? Of course, we're looking at countries that signed this deal. We have Mr. Tayo, who is joining us from Douala on the phone. Hello to you, sir, and thanks for joining us.
Gina, good afternoon, viewers of Africa Media. Concerning today's topic is a very interesting topic. Just concluded CFTA in Kagila. It is a good initiative to expand the unity of our continent. This milestone will take our continent a long way. It will make us to speak the same voice and be united. It will bring solidarity among the continent. I believe one of the objectives of this summit that just concluded is to create a single continent market for goods and services with free movement of persons and investment. And my problem now is that about Nigeria that out of this trade that didn't attend this summit. He has a big question. Thank you very much.
Before you go away, you did talk about the fact that these two countries, Nigeria and South Africa, is causing a big problem. Now, they have up to maybe 180 days before they meet again in June. Do you think these two countries would have changed their minds?
Nigeria, one of the things that why Nigeria pulled out of this trade-free something is that is because they say that some of the stakeholders in Nigeria have not been informed before the meeting, the summit is being held. And I believe that as soon, because the trade is still going to say 6 months before the operation, I believe that very soon, by the time that Nigeria will sort out the internal problem they have, I believe, because if Nigeria is not there, I don't see how these things, because Nigeria is the largest economic country in Africa. And if they are not there, the realization of this program will be very hard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tayo, who's joining us all the way from Douala in Cameroon. I should be the one thanking you for always being there with us. It's Views on the Continent on Africa Media TV. If you're just joining us, and today we are focusing on the African Union. Our leaders recently met in Kigali in Rwanda, and they have decided to agree on a free trade continental area, that is the free movement of goods and services, which is going to be accompanied by so many things, which will probably, as some analysts say, give the birth to a united Africa, a united currency, that's a single currency, and probably the movements of people as well. Just like the European Union, it is almost the same thing that is happening in Europe. Now, if this is copied and pasted in Africa, or if this comes through and it's successful in Africa, will we be united? We have a call on the line. Hello to you and thanks for joining us.
Sister Gina, good afternoon, old Africa. Okay, so I think that is better good, you know, it's better good. So what I'm say different leaders in Africa, he keep up who can go to do it. Yeah. Before he see which can do these things, but it's not only theory language, but now we need to go to practical the practical act in Africa for the African, you know. So I think early one African in this area in this moment tend to know what do you do it in this world. You have your responsibility, and your responsibility to ask you for what do you do it for your new generation in the future. So please, if you want to do anything, things your new generation will coming back for you. Understand? So this time, Africa need know what do we leave it in this African continent for a new generation which come back after we, you know. So I'm sorry for this time which I'm very to you. I think all African where we are in the world, I say you thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. That caller is joining us from the north of Africa, from Libya. And what he's saying, what I just got from what he's saying is the treaty or the agreement has been signed. Now, we are waiting for the practical part. And every leader who is at the table signing this agreement should know that it's going to go a very long way to impact the future African generation. It's not something that is done only for those of today. It's going to really help Africans in the long run. Now we have a reaction or a message from Mr. Primo. He says it is a good initiative carried out by the various heads of state. At least this will boost the economy of Africa. But what I'm surprised is at why some countries didn't sign the agreement. What could really be their aim? Maybe they're afraid it might come to their days of doom. That's Mr. Primo. Thanks for your message. His views on the continent on Africa Media TV. If you're just joining us, I would like us to go again once more to Kigali, where the free trade agreement for the African continent was just recently signed by 44 African countries out of 55. Let's have a listen to this video and I'll join you right after that.
Africa's dream of establishing a continental free trade area may be one step closer to realization. And that's after 44 leaders signed the agreement today. About 18 heads of state were present at the signing, including Kenya's Uhuru Kenyatta, South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa, and Ghana's Nana Akufo-Addo. Now, there was some uncertainty as to whether the agreement would see enough signatures today. And that was after Nigeria, one of Africa's largest economies, announced that President Buhari would not be inking the agreement because he needed more time to consult with stakeholders back at home. Countries like Uganda, Eritrea, and Guinea-Bissau also opted out of signing the agreement. Nevertheless, AU leaders remain positive that there's still progress made today.
The advantages we gain by creating one African market will also benefit our trading partners around the world, and that is a good thing. At the same time, we will be in a better position to leverage our growing strength and unity to secure Africa's rightful interests in the international arena. This is not just a signing ceremony. Today's deliberations are critically important as we chart the next steps on our journey towards the Africa we want.
It's obvious that in a process as complicated as this one, compromise is a principle with which everyone must be imbued. Beyond the debates about what some countries might gain or lose in the short term, the truth, statistically established, is that each of our member states and the continent as a whole will benefit immensely from the establishment of the free trade area.
Now, 3 documents were tabled and signed today: the establishment of the Continental Free Trade Area, the Kigali Declaration, and the Protocol for the Free Movement of People. While they are binding documents, their signatures still remain just a sign of goodwill. And that's until 55 states ratify the agreement in 180 days. And that will be in July at the next AU gathering. Until then, consultations will continue on the agreement. Nevertheless, many still see today as a day in history when Africa took its future into its own hands.
Of course, that's just the theory. We are hoping that other African countries indeed get to ratify this or sign this treaty before July or June, when African leaders are going to be meeting during the African Union Summit. Now, the whole vision is a free trade deal encompassing 1.2 billion people, stretching from Cape Town right up to Cairo. Goods and services, perhaps labor, flowing freely in and out of more than 50 African countries. It could create tens of thousands of jobs and significantly reduce unemployment among the continent's youthful population. That is why everyone is really wondering why some of these African countries did not get into signing this treaty. And of course, we are hoping that before they meet again in Addis Ababa, most of them would have made up their minds. We have Terence Sayong. Sayong is joining us here in the studio. Hello to you, Terence, and thanks for joining us on the program.
At this moment, Gina, talking about the 44 African countries that signed the Union Treaty yesterday for free trade in Africa. Agreements signed are not agreements implemented. Very, very true. But agree on it is always the first step. Perhaps you and I now need to aggressively encourage our government to follow the letter on the agreement. It will be very, very naive to suggest we will see this implementation overnight. That still remains a challenge to us Africa, because Africa as a whole, we don't still yet have total control or independence in Africa. So all our resources and our other means of production are still being controlled by the Western world. So it is a very, very big challenge for Africa and to our leaders. So they need to see into it that these issues are well implemented and well managed. Now, also we talking about this the other countries that didn't sign the treaty. We talk of Nigeria and South Africa. Nigeria being one of the biggest economy in Africa, with a population of over 190 million. So it's very somehow doubtful. But we hope these people they they see into it that it is to benefit Africa as a whole, and not just for self interest. And because also 27 African countries also still in the summit yesterday, they agree on the free movement, and that is where South Africa signed. South Africa didn't sign the free trade, but they signed something free movement. That is, like for visa, you can go into South Africa as an African. You can enter South Africa without being passing through the process of visas. So for this for this agreement to fully be implemented, we need to first of all chase away France from Africa, because we are looking for a united Africa. But with France still be the power man in Africa, it will be very, very difficult for us to achieve the goal of of a united Africa. So chasing France out of Africa and taking back control of our resources, our productions, and about taking total control of our land will quickly help to implement this treaty and see the dream of a united Africa comes true. Good day.
Thank you very much. That is Terence Sion. Thanks for your reaction. Of course, we are all hoping that after the signing of this agreement on paper, it gets into the application stage where actually African leaders get to implement the agreements that they have signed. Now, some people have been very confused as well. Thanks for that clarification, Terence. South Africa did not actually sign the free continental trade agreement. There were so many other treaties that were signed yesterday in Kigali. It is Views on the Continent of African Media TV. If you are just joining us, and today we are talking about Africa. Now, Africa is on the verge of forming the largest free trade area since the World Trade Organization. African leaders have met in Kigali and they have decided. We have Mr. Edmond Kwiate. He's joining us from Douala in Cameroon. Hello to you, sir, and thanks for joining us on the program.
Hello, Gina. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to all your televiewers. And it's always a pleasure to have you in this program.
Same here. Now, sir, can you just tell us what you think about this trade agreement? Is it the beginning of united Africa, as many African leaders who are all gone dreamt of in the past?
Yeah, Gina, let's say as a Pan-Africanist, any initiative, no matter how small it is, but any initiative that that goes in the direction in helping African countries to integrate, to come together, that is something that we appreciate. That is something that we appreciate very much. So this decision that 43 African countries took, to create a kind of, a free trade zone, the continental free trade zone. I think it's the world's largest one. I'm not sure if we have already got some such in the world. But it is something that we really understand. But that is not all. I think before we get into that, there are many things that we have to, look into for, to avoid putting cars before the horses. So I'm thinking that now the question we have to ask is, now that this market has been, kind of put in place, what are African countries going to change to exchange among themselves? If you take the case of Central African countries, for instance, all Central African countries depend much between 70 and 90% of importation of what they consume. Their domestic needs. They import mostly between 70 to 90%. So now, what are they going to exchange among themselves? That is the first question. And that brings us back to the principle. It is good for each and every country in Africa to think about producing within the country, to put a particular accent on the production, transformation, and therefore mean industries. We don't have industry in Africa. Our production rate is very poor, is very low. That's why we import everything, food, be it food, clothing, everything that we use every day, we import them. Cars, bikes, whatsoever phones and everything. So it is important for us we should begin to think about these things. How are we going to produce in Africa? And then to see how we're going to exploit our potential. We have a lot of potential in Africa. Like, for instance, if you go to Chad, for instance, I'm talking about something that I know very well. They have a lot of, cultures in Chad. Chad only can supply, the need in terms of needs of most of our Central African countries. But if you go to Carrefour, you go to supermarket, or most of these supermarkets, you realize that we're still importing meat that we eat from abroad, which is wrong. Meanwhile, Chad is exporting cows every day to Nigeria, Sudan, and many other countries, which is not good. So I think before putting in place a market, we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to sell in this market? Do we have enough goods to sell in this market? Let me quote you this example, for instance. You know that in Cameroon, which is a country I know very well, is my country, you know that Nigeria, Gabon, and Equatorial Guinea, they come and buy crops, they come and buy food in the field. That means when these are still growing, they come and buy it. And Africans, Cameroonians see it as a threat, for their feeding, because they say when these Gabonese, these Nigerians, these Equatorial Guinean people come and buy, the price climbs very fast, and which is normal because, instead of seeing it as an opportunity, we instead see it as a threat. So tomorrow, do we have enough tomatoes? Because we know that these countries, when they come to Cameroon, they buy mostly tomatoes, they buy vegetables and so on. But have we in Cameroon, for instance, what measures have we taken to make sure that we increase our production in terms of vegetables, tomato, all these goods that Nigerian, Gabonese, and Equatorial Guineans are coming here to buy? So if today we are not even able to supply our needs, our local needs, we are not even able to supply our neighboring country needs, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, and Nigeria, are we going to be able to supply if, for instance, all these 43 countries, these other countries, 40 countries turn into Cameroon and say, okay, guys, we will depend on you in our tomatoes needs, vegetable needs, beans, and so on. Will we be able to supply? So before we create a market, which is something very good, because that will help in that integration of our countries, but before we create a market, there is a question that we got to ask: what are we going to sell in this market? Do we have enough production that will be able to supply the needs of this market? That is the basic question I think we got to ask. And this brings us to what? To transformation, to production, to how to produce in our country, how to transform our our resources to supply the needs of our African continent. That is, to me, that is the most important question for now.
Okay, Mr. Kouyaté, before you leave us, I have another question for you. What do you think about some of these countries that did not sign this agreement, countries that took many Africans by surprise? We are looking at Nigeria and South Africa that are actually very big, have very big economies that most African leaders were thinking that getting into this agreement with them there is really going to help the African continent, but then they opted out of the agreement. What do you think about their opting out? What does this mean as well for the rest of the African continent?
Well, if you Gina, look, if you look into it very well, most of the countries that refuse actually to sign this agreement, you have countries like Nigeria, like South Africa. They are very powerful. They have a very strong economy, and they already got a lot of agreement with other countries that they depend on these countries, and these countries also depend on them. A country like South Africa, for instance, they have a lot of agreement with many Western countries. For them today, before they sign another agreement, they have to seek the consent of their former partners, because that South Africa, for instance, they have a very, in terms of agriculture, they are very far. They have a very good policy in terms of agriculture, and most of their products are exported. So they have already some agreement with many countries where they sell their products, where they sell many things. And also, they have also agreements with some countries where they import a lot of things. So today, for them to change, just like this, to sign another agreement, with other countries in Africa, they will have to seek the consent of their former partners, and they will have to make sure that for them to get the agreement they already got with other countries and come into this new agreement, they will be able to satisfy their people in terms of importing, in terms of exporting, because in this type of deal, you import and you export also. So they have to make sure that this new deal, this new agreement that African countries are signing will be able to help them to sustain their economy. They will help their economy to grow the more before they commit into such agreement. But if they are not sure, if they are not certain, if they are still doubting, of course they will not sign such agreement. It's for a country like Nigeria. And Nigeria is the second, second country in Africa in terms of a strong economy. They are the second country in Africa. They have already agreement with many countries, Western countries, where they export and where they also import. So that is it. And I think they are being cautious. They want to make sure that this is not, what we used to do in Africa, sign agreement. At the end of the day, it leads us to nowhere. I think they are being cautious, and it is reasonable. It is normal. Don't jump into a hole without knowing what you will find into it. So I think that is their position so far. And those countries who have signed, I think it depends how they are going to behave, what they are going to do after this agreement. I think will convince the rest of countries who are still reluctant to get into it. If we succeed, if we really turn this market, this new market, into a giant market where all African countries will be able to meet and share and exchange their goods, then I'm sure you will not even ask questions to Nigeria, South Africa, Burundi, and all these other countries who refuse to sign. They will come themselves because they will realize, hey, there is something to gain here. Because, like we said, between countries there is no friendship. It is a matter of interest. It's not a matter of friendship. It's not because they will say it's our African brothers that they will jeopardize all what they have got so far and then just jump into it. No, they want to make sure their interest is well preserved, is safe before they come into it. So I think they have been cautious, and I can understand that.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Kouyaté. Thanks for your lengthy contribution. And what I gathered from what he said is, before we plan or think about having markets to exchange goods for free, we have to start consuming what we have, not only sending them out, but then building industries to produce our own raw materials, or producing industries to process them so that they could be exported from one country to the other. And of course, we're looking at 90% off taxes that you could pay when you are importing or exporting from an African country. It is actually very a very good thing, and many African countries should be looking into it or planning to sign it. But then, just as he explained, there are some countries that did not sign. We're looking at the giant economies of Africa, such as South Africa and Nigeria. And according to Mr. Kuyate, this could be because they are being cautious, because Africans, this is not the first time we are getting into agreements, we are getting into laws or planning to do something, but then it always remains, or most of the time, it remains on papers. It is Views on the Continent on Afrique Media TV. If you are just joining us, you can join us in the studio using any of the numbers on the screen, or you send us a message on our Facebook page, Views on the Continent of Afrique Media TV. Leave a comment as well under our post. We will read it during the course of the program. I'd like us to go again to Kigali, where this agreement was recently signed by African leaders representing the continent.
It's a historical event that brings Africa to the cusp of greatness. A continental free trade area bringing together 1.2 billion people in 55 countries with a combined GDP of 340 trillion shillings is finally here.
What is at stake is the dignity and well-being of Africa's farmers, workers, and entrepreneurs, particularly women and youth.
The late Ahmed Ben Bella in May 1963 had urged his colleagues to die a little, if not totally, for the liberation of Africa. Today, we must all be inspired by a similar spirit of sacrifice for the sake of the integration of the continent. The time is no longer for hesitation.
And so one after the other, heads of states and governments, among them President Uhuru Kenyatta, signed the agreement committing to make the free trade area a reality. Some countries had a last-minute change of heart, leaving only 11 out of 55 AU member states out. They will, however, be given time to prepare and come on board.
South Africa will now be accessible to Kenyan manufacturers to sell their goods and services. Libya, Tunisia, Central African Republic, countries that we have never had trade agreements with, will now be feeling as if we are trading with our East African members that we have been doing a lot of business with so far.
Besides the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the leaders also appended their signatures to the Kigali Declaration and the Protocol on the Free Movement of People. Only 27, however, signed the protocol, allowing Africans to travel without visa requirement within the continent.
We should ensure that Africans are no longer treated like foreigners on their own continent, while others move therein freely.
Of course, you know, each country has got its own immigration regulations, but it has to be done in a much improved manner, like we have already done as East African member states, where today I can visit Rwanda with my identity card and vice versa.
And that is something that Musa Faki, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, said that has been on almost every person's lips. We cannot have others or foreigners in the African continent moving freely without Africans themselves being allowed to move freely. Why don't we have an Africa that you could move to one country or the other, maybe even without a passport, just your ID card, you could travel as well. You could do business. You could look for job opportunities. Now, we have Kevin saying that if the African Union got a single unifying currency like the euro in the European Union, it should be called the Afro. Those are some of the proposals that we are having. Chair Emmanuel is watching and he says Gaddafi tried and failed. He lost his life because of that. I don't see anything good. Some of the head of states do not reason the same. Nigeria and South Africa cannot sign any document without studying the contents well. He says good day, and he is joining us from Mutengene in the southwest region of Cameroon. Thanks a lot for your contribution. It's Views on the Continent on Africa Media TV, and we have a few minutes before we go this afternoon. And I would just like to remind you that the agreement is touted by the African Union as encompassing a market of 1.2 billion people and a gross domestic product of $2.5 trillion. It is hoped that it will encourage Africa's trade to diversify away from its traditional commodity exports outside the continent. With this diversity, the volatile prices of which have hurt the economies of many countries is not something that Africa is going to be looking at. Before we go again, I would just like us to listen to this other report still on the free trade agreement in Kigali, in Rwanda. Take a listen.
One by one, they signed up to an agreement decades in the making. It's estimated the African Continental Free Trade Area could see business between African nations increase by more than 50% within 4 years. The idea is to bring together countries with a combined population of 1.2 billion people and gross domestic product, or GDP, of more than $2 trillion into one market.
Africa is stronger acting together. Now we are creating an African continental free trade area. So we are realizing that we are stronger when we have a larger market.
So far, 44 of the African Union's 55 member states have signed the protocol. But there is one notable absentee, Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy. President Muhammadu Buhari did not attend the signing ceremony to allow time for more consultations. Nigeria's labor unions had cautioned him against signing what they called an extremely dangerous initiative. African Union officials admit not everyone is satisfied that individual countries will be better off under the deal.
Look at the European Union. From the Treaty of Rome through Maastricht, the Treaty of Lisbon, every project of integration at any level is always a work in progress.
But before that happens, banks are looking to fill the void.
What we are doing is to make sure that the currency problem is eliminated. And we are working, and we are going to launch before the end of the year an intra-African trade payment and settlement platform. That platform will make it possible for people to trade intra-regionally in their local currencies.
While Africa's most advanced economies are at an advantage with their more developed manufacturing capabilities, some of them remain opposed to the agreement. Their trade unions are already raising red flags, arguing unfettered access by foreign workers to their labor markets could cause problems as people move to the continent's stronger economies in search of jobs.
Now, Nigeria thinks this is an extremely dangerous initiative. I do not know what the other countries that did not sign think about this, but then most Africans think this is a step to uniting the African continent if this is actually implemented and not just left only on paper. Fellow viewers, we've come to the end of today's program. I thank you all for watching, and those who participated, a big thanks to you as well. You can follow up the rest of the conversation on our Facebook page Afrique Media TV, Views on the Continent of Afrique Media TV on Facebook. I thank the technicians as well for being there with us to the end. Now, from wherever you're watching me, it's goodbye for now.